going to take a call before the crew yells at me even more. We're going out to New York. We've got Rajin, no pronouns given. We talking with a theist, wants to ask about the science-based reasoning for the lack of God's existence. Well, hey, Rajin, you're talking with SR and J Mike. Are we right? Is that kind of what you're asking about today?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm asking. And thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I'll give my kind of thoughts real quick, and then I'll kick it over to J Mike, and then we'll give it back to you so you can tell us how we're wrong or whatever. But if somebody comes up to me and asks this question, like, "Hey, SR, what's the science-based reasoning for the lack of God's existence?" Honestly, the first thing that I'm gonna say is, well, there may not be one. It kind of depends on what the version of God you're talking about. So I think that's a really important place for us to start. There may be a logical reason, as opposed to a science-based one, but it really all depends on the version of God you're talking about. But yeah, let me kick it over to J Mike, and we'll give it right back to you, Rajin.
Yeah, my views don't really. I'm taking most people to say that that's not like a scientific project, but I guess my view is just across the board. I would just want to look at the kind of commitments, term usage, the predicates you need to describe the theory, all this kind of extra stuff, and then compare that with like competing theories. And so I've just settled on it's weird to say naturalism because defining stuff like that gets really weird, but yeah, like the way that I've taken like Christians to be using the term separated from God and angels and stuff like that is this like causal reality starting at t = 0 in my view, or something like that. I'm just going to compare those views to that kind of a view, and so I just have more of like a positive argument, depending on what we're talking about, and be like, oh, okay, I think my view can actually better explain that data, and you can just shave off the God part, and so you're left with this view. Hopefully that makes sense. I think it was a bad way of explaining it, but
yeah, I was following. You got kind of two different takes on that, Rajin. What do you think? What are your thoughts?
Well, so I do want to let you guys know I do have an open mind. Like, I am theist, but I do have an open mind, so I don't want you to think I'm just going to dismiss anything you guys are saying. I think you defined it very well, that we do need to identify what we consider God. And I'm Christian, but I do recognize a lot of the Christian things are not provable. So I'm not going to act like, oh, Jesus' birthday was on December 25th or anything like that, because that's just unrealistic. But so my personal reason for why I believe that theism is justified by science. Also, I don't know. I know you guys said there are two different things for you guys. I kind of use logically and scientifically interchangeably. So that may not make
okay. Real quick, Rajin. I don't want to interrupt too much. I want to hear what you're saying, because I think you're about to go into something really good that we can really hash out. I appreciate that clarification about how you use logic and science kind of interchangeably. I do think it is worthwhile for us to keep those concepts separate and not allow for that wiggle, because I think J Mike and I, when we're talking about logic, right, when we're using that terminology in these conversations, we really are talking about like formal logic. We really are talking about like syllogisms and stuff. And like, obviously science utilizes, logical formations and stuff. But when we go into the realm of science exclusively, we're talking about that whole thing about like making an observation, getting a hypotheses, and like testing the data, peer reviewed, double blind studies, all of that, test tubes and beakers. That being said, thank you for the clarification, Rajin, because now when we go forward, novel predictions, absolutely.
That when he says the scientific thing with God, I'm just like, well, if it's a scientific enterprise, then I'd be curious on what's the expectations, like what's the novel predictions based on God. I don't think you can do that unless you start like inserting a whole bunch of desires and beliefs and characterizations, and then it becomes very like not very impressive why the money stealing fairy best explains why my money is missing, because we've put these desires to steal money into this being, you know what I mean? It starts to become a little less interesting. So I don't know how you want to take it or if he wants to respond, but I'll plant my flag as I'd be curious if you if you have novel predictions on the view, if it's some type of scientific enterprise, because I think that's what's supposed to be expected. But I don't know. I don't know if that's what you're saying.
And I think that was kind of where you were about to go, Rajin. So I'm going to let you go. What are those kind of those reasonings that you're using, and if you're using that science, what are those brand new predictions you're looking for?
Right. So I'll try to make a more clear delineation. It's just in my head. It's just all the same thing, but I'll try to make it more clear. So there's two specific scientific laws that I'm thinking about, and one of them is conservation of mass, and the other one is spontaneous generation.
Okay.
So I'll go into those very briefly because
spontaneous generation.
About it. Right. So I'll go into that one first. So spontaneous generation is basically the idea that nothing could come from something cannot come from nothing. So something has to produce something else. So that's just within the natural.
But that is like, that's kind of like talking about the nothing from something thing is such a waste of time, and here's why. Like, if I just believe that the universe was infinite into the past, don't have that problem. If I think that the universe began to exist at t equals 0, but it's necessary that t equals 0, like what I mean by necessary here is that all of the ways that the world could have been, it starts this way with t equals 0, right? It starts with natural causal reality at t0, okay? Now, in that view, there isn't anything prior because all worlds that could have started start that way, and there isn't a prior moment. That is the beginning. To say it's prior would just be like nonsensical, right? Because that's the beginning. So there's a view that has, like, okay, here's a way to say it. Like, it doesn't come from anything, right? There's not a state of nothing. The same way if I said, like, there's no one at my door, I'm not saying there is a no one at my door. I'm saying that there isn't any person that satisfies the conditions such that there is a person at my door. And the same thing I'm saying, there isn't a state of which that satisfies the conditions that the initial state exists. The initial state exists necessarily. And that's going to be a very non-objectionable move when I'm talking to theists, because they do the same thing. They place the same necessity chip on their God, right? So I'm just trying to parody I'm trying to parody the view and show that my view is going to make way less commitments, and it's going to explain the data at least equally as well, but if not better. That's kind of my whole MO.
Yeah. What do you think?
Right. So I think it cannot be dismissed, and the reason I say that is because
what do you mean it can't not be dismissed? Hold on. I'm offering you a view that there isn't a state of nothing. So if you have worries about that, and that goes into your argument, I've just gave you an undercutting defeater for that argument. There's a position that holds the proposition gods do not exist, right? That's the view I'm holding, some type of metaphysical naturalism. And then you are pointing out this thing, but I'm giving an undercutter defeater for that. That's not a view that's entailed by atheism. I just gave two views that don't entail something coming from nothing. So this would be like me talking about a Pepsi right now. It's a waste of time, right? It has nothing to do with anything. And before we go on, I want you to acknowledge that point, because I will refuse to move on to any other point until we acknowledge this point.
Right. No, I see the point. I just don't. So the point that you illustrated.
Can you repeat back my point as best as you can? Because I just want to make sure we understand each other.
No, of course, yeah. No, that's the thing to say. So you illustrated a world of t equals 0, where the beginning is just a state of the world just being. So there needed to be nothing that had to precede it. So I do see what you're saying. Did I get that right, just in case?
That's true. That is right. That's good. It's accurate. It's just that I have this qualifier that, so like, let me ask you, do you think that God could have not existed? Like, it was possible for God to fail to exist at the beginning or eternally, right? It could have been a world without God. Or do you think it's necessary that God must exist? Just so I can get a slight understanding on your view before I go back to mine.
So I would say God must exist.
Great, that's necessity. Great.
Yeah.
So notice how in all possible worlds, the world starts out with God, and then he either decides to create or doesn't.
Right.
There isn't a state of nothing prior to God, right? I mean, well, in yours, you have this initial item, maybe he's eternal or something like that, and that's fine. But then you have an infinite regression, so there's not going to be an issue with an infinite regression on the other view that I offered. But notice how in both those views, God exists no matter what. The initial state exists no matter what. So if you turn around and ask you, but did it come from nothing? You're asking me for a what? And I'm going, you either aren't understanding or you're pulling my leg. So I want to, are we clear that this whole something from nothing thing is like a red herring? It has nothing to do with like showing that, you know, like atheism isn't true or that God exists, because it's just both of our views don't have this. So there's like no point of talking about it.
Right. So I definitely fully disagree, and I'll tell you why.
Okay. This is a very, very, very hard burden for you to meet.
Well, I'm just. Can I just get a second to talk? Because I didn't.
Of course, yeah. Sorry, I'm getting excited because I can't believe somebody would take this.
No. I love to have this conversation because I've honestly been looking for a scientific justification. I couldn't find it, so I'm very glad I ran into you guys. But,
yeah. Go for
sure,
it.
I'm not providing scientific justification.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to undercut what your initial reasons are. I'm just trying to show that they're kind of like talking about a Pepsi. It just has nothing to do with anything.
You said, Rajin, that you disagreed with what J. Mike was just laying out. I would say in large part, J. Mike and I are on the same page here. So yeah, what is that pushback? Like why is everything that J. Mike just said not actually getting at the importance of what you're talking about or whatever? So yeah, give us that.
So again, like the idea of spontaneous generation, it basically says that the natural universe the way it is could not have made itself. So the idea that he was saying where the universe just existed, it doesn't make sense within the confines of what's capable in the natural universe the way it is. So what I'm asserting that God is a force outside of the laws of the natural universe. I don't know what's before him. I don't know what's after him. But sure. I'm just saying what he is whatever could set the universe in motion. Or the first one, I'm pretty sure.
So let me point out something that you said right at the beginning, and I hope this is clear. And you know,
as clear as my face as I turn into an ethereal being.
I know. Away. You're like disappearing right in front of us. But so one of the things that you said right at the beginning, Rajin, was you said that the universe couldn't have like made itself from itself, right? Do you understand why that falls foul of the same thing J. Mike was just presenting a second ago? Because what you're doing in that scenario is already accepting that there was a state of existence before time equals zero. That's what J. Mike was saying. So the idea that the universe came out of itself or the universe made itself or anything like that, that's not entailed in our views here. That is not something that we have to contend with, right? And honestly, in your view, you don't either. This is not something that anybody in the conversation actually has to account for. Does that make sense?
So I see what you're saying, that I'm talking about something completely different to what you guys are saying. I do see.
Okay, maybe so. So maybe you go ahead. But if I can, just real quick, were you not, like, when you started, you had talked about this something coming from nothing thing, and I stopped you immediately because I was like, this is like talking about a cat walking down the street. We don't even need to talk about it because, like, if I have a view where it doesn't, like, this, you know, atheism doesn't entail something coming from nothing, and I can give you this view. There's no God. The initial state of the universe starts at t equals 0, right? That's the beginning of all causal reality, right? Maybe it's just a quantum wave function, and T2 is when the universe starts. I don't know, right? There's a lot of different ways you can do this. Or I have something in non-metric time, right? Like Alyssa Ney has this view about a necessary quantum wave function. I don't pretend to understand that view, so I'm not going to try. Or I could have an infinite regression, but either one of those views don't have. You could be an atheist. You could say there was a state of nothing and something came from it. I don't know what somebody's even saying when they say that.
Yeah.
But do you understand that, like, am I getting you right that this is an important part of your argument?
Yeah, it definitely is. So in terms of your argument, I don't think it's scientifically viable. That's what I'm saying. Because
yeah, but But nobody holds that view. I mean, do you believe me when I'm an atheist and say I don't think something came from nothing? Do you believe me when I say that?
Yeah.
Do you think it's?
I believe, yeah.
Okay. Now the separate question is whether I know it or not. Maybe there's this entailment from atheism to something coming from nothing. Do you hold that view? Because maybe I don't believe it, but maybe it's an unnoticed entailment.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can,
right?
Because that's your burden. Your burden is to show that the propositions that, or like the propositional attitude that someone takes that I don't believe in God, or my position, gods do not exist. That there's somehow from either one of those entails that you believe something came from nothing. Is that your view? Because that's false if you do.
So not necessarily. I don't pigeonhole anyone into any particular category, whether they say they're a Christian or atheist or agnostic.
Then this point in principle cannot be important. If you answer it that way, then in principle, this point cannot be important because you've conceded there's no logical derivation you can make from those propositions to the existence of, or saying that something had to come from nothing. So thus, it's not an important point because I'm somebody that's not going to have that view. You don't have to contest against that view, right?
There
and
may
it's not
be
a view that you have.
There may be some believers or non-believers out there. In fact, I'd be willing to say there definitely are that would take that view that something can come from nothing or that something did come from nothing. But it is not necessary for an argument from a non-deist perspective, and it definitely isn't a part of the arguments that J. Mike and I are talking about.
It's like if I said all theists must believe that God committed deicide in the act of creation and no longer exists. So the proposition, God created us is true, but the atheists are right. God doesn't exist because he no longer exists. Someone would be like, yeah, but I don't hold this view that God committed deicide. So if you're mounting some argument against that, you're leaving me out. You still have all of your work left ahead. And that's what I'm trying to explain to you. Even if you successfully showed this thing that something can't come from nothing, I'm going, hey, buddy, I'm still here. You still have to talk to me about this and all the other atheists that don't agree with that, right? It just doesn't, it won't do any work for you. It'll only do work on this very small level of people who aren't thinking very much, right? And those are easy targets.
Right. So I see what you're saying, that my point is moot because it doesn't affect you guys. But the reality is that I have to make a consistent argument. So I can't just say the parts that, because if you cut up any argument, then you could find cracks in the armor. So I need to make a full and complete argument.
No, if I have an argument with premises in it and someone goes, that premise is redundant, or you have a premise about cats being cute and has nothing to do with this argument, I can cut out that premise and just make sure that the form of the argument is formally valid, and then it'll preserve the truth of the conclusion. Yeah.
I don't think you're being inconsistent by not discussing this and providing an argument for it, because in all reality, it just doesn't sound like it is part of your argument. And at the very least, it definitely isn't what we're discussing. It'd be
like adding Pepsis to your argument now. And then when I called out Pepsis have nothing to do with it, you'd be like, yeah, but I can't, all of it will crumble down with me. Maybe, but I really suspect that's not going to be the case, because I don't think this thing links to anything else. I think it's a giant red herring.
Yeah. Now we could push back a little and argue that actually the concept of ex nihilo creation, spontaneous creation, whatever, something from nothing, that is something that is entailed in the Abrahamic view of God, right? We could make that argument from our side, but to be honest, I don't even think J. Mike and I would go down that route.
I thought about it because I was like, in my head, I was like, if he's Christian, he's going to have some view. It's not like God has this celestial Plato that's eternally been existing always next to him. He's got to create it from nothing. There's not a thing that he uses to create it. Right? It's from no thing.
But at the end of the day, right, exactly. And at the end of the day, it just sounds like at the very least, all of us, this just isn't something that actually moves the needle really big either way for us, What I would love though, Rajin, because we do still have a little bit more time. We've got a couple of other great calls and we are going to get to them in a bit. But I'd love if we could just a few minutes just kind of hashing out. It sounded like you have some maybe scientific based or logical reasons that you accept the existence of the Christian God. And I'd love if we could just kind of toss those around for a few minutes and see if maybe we make any progress. So if you have anything, hey man, this is my reason, they did this study, or here's a logical argument, we'd love to tackle that real quick.
Well, I will say I am a Christian, but I also did say I'm not trying to justify the Christian God. I'm just trying to justify God scientifically.
Sure, but
sounds like two different propositions.
It does. So here's my problem when people do that, okay? And we can go that route if you really want to after I explain this, Rajin. My problem is that in both scenarios you have characteristics and criteria of this concept or entity that you're trying to describe. And in this scenario, you're giving us essentially this really, really hardcore specific thing, and then you're giving us this like really wishy-washy vague thing. And when we push back on the real hardcore specifics, you retreat back to the wishy-washy vague. That is known as a Mott and Bailey. And I think when we actually believe something and hold something to be, if I told you I was going to make an argument for Bigfoot, I believe in Bigfoot's existence in the United States, eastern northern woodlands, okay? And then you go, all right, SR, make an argument for Bigfoot. And I go, whoa, hang on. I'm not making an argument for Bigfoot specifically. I'm just making an argument for, different hominoids that are outside of our current understanding of. You'd kind of feel like you were duped.
I'm not saying
a little,
this phenotypic trait rises to fixation, just like some phenotypic trait rises to fixation.
Right.
It is one of those things where like I want to be charitable to this kind of view, and I want to let you speak. I'm sorry, I'm being so rude about this. There is a problem I have when I talk to people about this, that I feel like I'm in the waiting room to the next waiting room to the next waiting room, and I never see the doctor, because we focus on this like tiny vanilla austere version of God in the corner of the room. But like when I'm doing my view, like, I mean, this isn't about me. It's just something in my head that goes off. It's like, I'm trying to compare the views, and it's best to put as much of the view on the table to know if I'm not being like doing this too early, like, right. And just going, oh, okay, my view is simpler, but it's like, wait, I haven't talked about the incarnation and the Trinity and maybe all this stuff. Mr. Naturalist, you need this to explain the data. Like, I haven't heard about it yet. So I feel like you do yourself a disservice.
Yeah.
No, I know. Look, we'll go on the, I'm doing something I probably shouldn't. So fairness to you, I'm just agreeing with secular here that I think focusing on this kind of vanilla austere version of God is kind of dishonest to yourself, because it's not the God you think exists, and it strips itself away from certain properties and gives it no set of like desires that you think it has. And it's very hard to even know it's even being expressed when you not dumb it down, but make it this very vanilla thing. It's just, It's really hard to know it's being expressed. It also is not, it's also like not going to be a favorable view, but yeah, you can just go ahead with your scientific evidence or whatever.
We'll give you. We'll
I just
give
wish
you,
we would talk about the things you really believe in.
I agree. Yeah. I agree. I would love that too. But Rajin, here's what we're gonna do, because I know we've been talking a lot, man, and there's a little bit of a delay on these things, and so sometimes it can be hard to get your thoughts out. We're gonna give you 60 seconds from the time that I finally shut up. I'm gonna say go, Rajin, and then the 60-second clock will go up, and J Mike and I will be quiet that whole time, but. The moment that 60 seconds is up, we're gonna come in and we'll respond and stuff.
And I'm gonna work on a version of naturalism where I don't talk about any of the stuff that I do and defend that later on for some reason.
Yeah. So we're gonna give you that time so you can lay out the case for us. If it's science based, if it's logic based, whatever you like, Rajin. But we're gonna give you that uninterrupted 60 seconds. Okay. So you can go now, Rajin.
Okay. So I'm just gonna summarize really quickly. The scientific reason for I believe God exists is because the world cannot have been created from nothing or from something within itself, according to the natural rules of the universe and of physics and of chemistry and biology. So whatever made the world to be starting, or the first mover, that is God. That was an argument. And just to quickly address everything you were saying, the logistics, I would love to call back and talk about why I would like to justify the Christian God. but I have to be respectful of everyone's time and everyone's opinions.
No, that's fine.
I came here to talk about a specific opinion. Yeah, so I mean, I'd love to call back and talk about that, but I'm just trying to be respectful to the logistics of your show and of the other callers. So yeah, I'll come back and I'll definitely talk about that. But I'm not trying to just act like, oh, I'm not going to talk about that. But
sure. You're at the last few seconds there, so we'll just go ahead and jump in. But yeah, no. I just want to say that I think. I don't think there is a scientific study that has currently been done that gives us the ability to actually determine whether or not the universe could create itself, whether or not nothing really is a thing, whether there is something outside of the laws of physics or reality or anything. I don't think there is anything scientific currently that has been posited or actually run that could give us that solid justification. Scientific studies don't give us 100% absolute definitive proof, right? But what they do is they point us very fucking hard one direction or the other, right? That's what a good study does. That's what a good hypothesis does. But I truly am unaware of anything whatsoever in that realm that gets us to the conclusion that you just mentioned. What I can say is, and I know you told us this earlier, that you interchange logic and science, and no worries there. That's why I'm moving into this with you, Rajin. I do think there are logical arguments that could be presented that could potentially get us there. But I gotta be honest, I really feel like J. Mike and I dealt with those pretty well right off the rip. If we just take the move in the logical argument that we do not accept that nothing is a possibility, then the argument is done, right? It has nowhere else to go. We could then go.
It's a non sequitur to say that I got to follow it, because it could equally just follow that the initial state of the universe explains why something doesn't come from nothing, because there couldn't have been nothing.
Exactly. And so if we took that stance, then hey man, no worries. This is a great conversation to have, right? Yeah. But truly, it kind of sounds like this just isn't something that really does matter one way or the other for us and our arguments. J. Mike, you want to wrap up any thoughts real quick? And
I actually want to be charitable, like, to something you said, because maybe I missed the part with the scientific and logic thing. I wasn't tracking as much there, because the first thing I wanted to say before you said that was that this isn't a scientific argument. This is a philosophical argument.
Yeah, he said he uses logic and science interchangeably. Yeah. So yeah. Because
what you would be doing is you would have to be like, I mean, there's like, it's muddy, because you could be saying like, look, I'm using things that like in the sciences and I'm forming this deductive argument. There's a lot of ways that this you can mean by saying it's a scientific argument, or you could mean it in a way that I'm thinking someone might do, where they're like, oh, I can make these novel predictions and we can like find God in the universe. Now, like, probably different camps of people. People are like, you can't do that, but I can use, science to show it's more likely that a God's responsible for this or something. Like, they can try to do that, right? They're going to end up being like philosophical arguments on like fine tuning, or in your case, something, what explains why there's something rather than nothing. But that is explained on 3 views that we've offered. Theism, it's explained on the view that the beginning of the universe is necessary, or even brutally contingent, I guess. In some worlds, maybe there is just nothing, right? I don't know. But, or there's this infinite regression of previous states, right? And on either of those views, you don't get, it just doesn't follow. Like, if you're like, one, it seems like it's question begging, because there's someone that made this, and that assumes the falsity of someone like my view, because I don't think there was someone that made this. Now, that language might just be like, how did this come about, or something like that. But this argument's not gonna get you there. I'd look into like other arguments that theist philosophers have proposed to kind of see where this one stacks up against them. I don't think, I've never heard a good argument. They might exist, but I wouldn't put this in the camp of a good argument. In fact, no offense, I would say this is a bad argument, because it doesn't do what it purports to do. And I think if I tried to like form this, and it would just be like formally invalid, or just one of the conditional statements just going to be dubious.
Yeah, and I'm with that too. Rajin, I am sorry, but we are gonna just drop you like a hot rock. But that's only because we've been talking for about 30 minutes and we got other callers. But dude,
and I got 18 minutes. So
right.
Yeah,
this was really, really good, and we really appreciate you. So please give us a call back in and hang out with us in the future, and let's hash it out. Let's